Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about my Deadeye Spellslinger featuring Blazing Salvo, Rolling Magma, and Fireball. After having neglected Spellslinger ever since it first came out, I wanted to refresh my memory of just how fun the playstyle is, and it surely didn't disappoint. I didn't just want to play a meta setup like Volatile Dead or Reap Exsanguinate, but I still wanted it to be synergistic and not just throw some random spells to fill the screen with. I also didn't just want this to be a strictly worse version of an already existing cast on crit build, so Frostbolt Ice Nova was out of the question as well. While looking through the list of all spells, fire projectile skills caught my eye in particular because not only do they all work well with Deadeye's chain, they also all have an AoE component, making it easy to skill all three spells at the same time while having multiple projectiles, chain, and AoE scaling. One of projectile skills' biggest weaknesses is that they usually have to use greater multiple projectiles to get good map clear, but with the +2 projectiles from Deadeye, +2 from Dying Sun, and +1 from the newly introduced Glimpse of Chaos Implicit, this became a non-issue, giving us way more space for another damage support in all three Spellslinger setups, and not having to deal with GMP's less damage multiplier. Chain also comes in handy as a clear speed monster, with even more options like Snake Pit, making clear even crazier and getting a second chain, although this is not included in this footage since I wanted to get a little tankier, but it sure is a nice meme and you will feel it. The 30% chance to chain off of walls also really surprised me, making indoor maps a lot more bearable as a projectile-based build, and absolutely shredding bosses that just happen to stand next to a wall. This build was a ton of fun, and I'm actually thinking about making a league start viable version of it, since a lot of your damage will actually come from your gems, and there's no required uniques whatsoever, so who knows what I will come up with. With that being said, let's get into the build portion of the video. Alright, so first let's ask ourselves a question as old as humanity itself, and that is, do we use Barrage or do we use Frenzy plus Barrage support? Now, for me it's an easy Barrage, and I'll show you why. So I'll just put this in, and by the way, I'm not even talking about the fact that with Barrage you have space for Culling Strike, which is really, really good since you don't have to get it on gloves. But just on its own, just gonna refresh my Quicksilver here. If you run through a map, so I don't have my spells in right now, they're here, but if I run through a map, basically I want to have a smooth gameplay. So if I go through this, see how fast the Barrage goes. Like, we even have space for fast attacks in the setup. This is just phenomenal. It really makes a difference. Now, unfortunately, the Divergent Barrage has additional attack time per projectile, and we're stacking quite a bit of projectiles. So the problem arises when you just have a higher cast time with this setup. So let's see how that would look like. Doesn't look very enticing, right? You're standing there for almost double the time. And sure, it gets a little better with Frenzy charges, since Frenzy has more attack speed per Frenzy charges, sure. But you also want to look at the Deadeye Gale Wind charges, which I'm going to go over. You always want to have that at 10, not only when you're standing still, but you also want to have it while mapping, obviously, because this is more focused towards mapping. But yeah, so for me, it's an easy Barrage plus Culling Strike. I can also get the Frenzy charge on chest if I need to. But yeah, just wanted to point this out real quickly. All right, so with that question out of the way, let's talk about the meat of the build, the spells. So we're using Rolling Magma, Fireball, and Blazing Salvo. These are all the projectile fire skills, and they all synergize with Deadeye in its own ways, with the additional projectile, with the ricochet, and you can also scale AoE as we do on the tree here and here for a little bit more coverage. We also have a Dying Sun, which double dips for AoE and additional projectiles. But I just want to quickly go over all of the spell itself, because they all scale with those things in a different kind of way. Now, first up, let's talk about Rolling Magma. This is arguably the worst of the three. It doesn't really have a function. Like, Blazing Salvo is for single target mostly, and Fireball is for clearing mostly. Rolling Magma is just an in-between, kind of the glue of this build that holds everything together. It's pretty decent at clearing and decent at single target. So it's kind of a nice thing to have as well, since you can get slower projectiles on your glove slot, basically making this a 5-link and giving the skill a very interesting dynamic. And I think this is my W, yeah. So if we look at Rolling Magma itself, I will just go for each spell on its own to kind of show you. Rolling Magma, as you can see, has a very interesting trajectory, but what's interesting about Rolling Magma is that the extra chain does not work as you think it does. Like, if you know Magma Orb from the past, you already know this, but so if I hit an enemy, it's not just chaining to the next enemy and kind of leaving its trajectory. It actually, an extra chain means that it bumps another time from the ground. So all of these bumps are chains, and the spell itself has 4 chains, and then we get an additional one from Deadeye, so it makes the cast a little longer. You can also make this by just casting it further away, then it gets even longer. If you cast more towards your cursor, it's here. So yeah, that's just that. The slower projectile is just there to make it possible that the projectiles overlap against enemies that have a high hitbox, a big hitbox. So basically what you have to be careful about with Rolling Magma is the one trajectory can overlap multiple times on the same enemy. So if I just go this line here, for example, these can all overlap with the same enemy. Obviously, at most, it will overlap 2 times, because after that, it's just going to be somewhere else. But it cannot overlap with GMP. So GMP obviously gives it these rows. If we click Dying Sun, we get 6 different rows of projectiles here. Obviously, you cannot overlap with like other trajectories. Only one Magma Orb or Rolling Magma that is on the ground at the same time can actually hit. So only another bounce can actually hit the same target again. That's something that's a little bit complicated, but yeah. So that's how chain interacts. AoE should be pretty obvious. Once it goes off the ground, it has an AoE explosion, and additional projectiles, you get different trajectories basically. Next up, Fireball. Now this is one of my favorites. In this build, it is the biggest clear you can have. So let's look at it here. I think it's Q, yeah. So let's look at how it looks. Yeah, it's really, really nice. Like this, imagine this chaining off of enemies as well. You get the free chain. This can also, you can't see the chain off of walls here, unfortunately, that you get from Deadeye here. You cannot see that because it only chains if an enemy is nearby. But it is glorious indoors, I can tell you, especially with Fireball. Now, so here's the thing with Fireball. It is just there for clear. It has an AoE explosion once it lands. If it chains, it doesn't explode. It doesn't AoE explode, so it's not like broken with chain. But it does obviously have the projectile hit. And at the last enemy that it hits, after all chains, however many chains you have, after all chains are used up, it will explode in an AoE. So it's really, really nice. It's basically all your clear. And yeah. Also something to mention is Fireball's AoE can also overlap against enemies. So basically shotgun. So if you're here, was it W? No, that was Rolling Magma. Q? Yeah. So if you're against an enemy that is near a wall, these AoEs from Fireball can actually overlap, but it will have to actually be the AoE explosion. Obviously, the same projectile cannot hit the same enemy twice. But for example, in a situation like this here, all your fireballs will, for example, hit a Minotaur or whatever is standing next to a wall. All right, now last but definitely not least, Blazing Salvo. This is our main single target, but it's also really good at clearing. It's also kind of an all-rounder. It's just kind of a better Rolling Magma, but obviously we can't have 2 of them at the same time. But it's really, really nice to have this. So I will just go over a common misconception that people have. I always see people using concentrated effect with Blazing Salvo to make it overlap more. Now this actually doesn't matter. So the gem itself has a spread depending on where you hit with your mouse. So if I hit next to myself, the spread is very small and almost everything overlaps. But if I hit further and further away, as you can see, it spreads out more and more and more. And all that conk effect does is it's actually a really big side effect, a really big downside to have less AoE. Because if you look here, the spread is still the same, but the small explosions get smaller, so you have less overlaps actually. Because usually with skills like Whispering Ice or Firestorm, what you want is to kind of decrease the spread so that more things can overlap. But in this, it completely backfires. Just just stand in front of the target and you're next to it. If it has a big hitbox, as you can see, it's a very, very narrow space. So you will basically overlap with all projectiles. All right, next up, our Ascendancy. So as I already alluded to in the intro, Deadeye basically makes it so we don't have to use GMP, which is huge because imagine having to use GMP on all 3 setups and then also having such a high mana multiplier. If you don't know how Spellslinger works, basically you have more mana reservation for your spells the higher the mana multiplier is from whatever support gem you're using. So GMP has 165% mana multiplier. We're only using stuff that has very low multiplier to be able to fit all 3 spells into the build. So it's a complete no-go. So this basically this is the only thing that makes this build viable. This build would not really be as smooth at all in any other Ascendancy, just for this reason alone. But we also get the chain. As already stated, it's insane to have the collide with terrain. You get 30% chance to chain. It's so good. You can even farm toxic sewers with a projectile-based build. It's so smooth, even when you're like in very confined spaces. It's awesome. Also, the +1 chain, I don't have to explain it. It's really, really good. These 2 nodes are the big sellers, and the other 2 nodes are also pretty decent. Now, Gathering Winds obviously gives you Tailwind, also Tailwind Effect. So this goes up to like, normally Tailwind is only 8% more action speed, but with full Gale Force up, that's 20% increased action speed. Now, the biggest thing about this, we could get Tailwind on boots, right? The increased effect is nice and all, but we could get this on boots, theoretically. But the thing is, we also want cooldown recovery. So if we want to get cooldown recovery, we either have to forego Elusive or Tailwind. And if we have this, we can get Tailwind from here, and then Elusive and cooldown recovery from boots. So really, really nice. So this basically indirectly also gives us like cooldown recovery or something. But it's just really, really nice to make your boots crafting a lot easier. And the last points are Focal Point. Not crazy about it, but it does make our Assassin's Mark a little bit better. This comes out to like 12% more damage against bosses. Definitely not crazy, but there's nothing else we would want here. I don't really want the Wind Ward. We don't really have great defenses. Like we're going Glancing Blows, so we'll get hit a lot. But yeah, since we don't really have any avoidance, I don't really want to go for Wind Ward because our Gale Force, we're just, with every hit, it will be removed. So yeah, I just went for this instead. Before we go over the items in detail, I just want to point out like cooldown recovery for Spellslinger in general. So there is certain server tick rates, making it so there's breakpoints in cooldown recovery that you want to reach, and under that it doesn't really do anything. So in this case, the cooldown recovery rate we want to hit is 93% in total. So you get 40 from a level 21 Spellslinger, you get 30 from the Helm Enchant, that's 70, and then with Torrent's Reclamation and the boots, you somehow have to reach in total 23%. So if you have, for example, 19% on the Torrent's Reclamation and 14% on your boots, you don't need Maven cooldown reduction, which is nice. You get to the 93%. Everything over doesn't do anything. You can't really hit another breakpoint. So yeah, only go for 93% exactly. Everything under will decrease your damage by 10%. So definitely look out for that. For example, if you have a perfect roll, if you have a 20% here, you only need 13% here. Or if, for example, you only have level 20 Spellslingers instead of level 21, you will lose 1 cooldown recovery rate here that you have to gain from one of these items as well. All right, so next up, let's go with the items. The only really crazy item I have in this build is this wand here. The way you make a good Spellslinger wand is with Deafening Essence of Angers. This gives us flat damage, and with Spellslinger, flat damage gets basically added to the spells that are supported by Spellslinger. So you actually want the weapon damage, and other than that, you want just anything that has to do with crit or spell damage. Now, a very cheap alternative is actually an Eclipse Solaris. When I was looking through alternatives in POB, I stumbled upon this. This is like 20% less damage than this wand, and this wand is extremely expensive. So if you cannot afford a wand like this, definitely just go for this. It also gives nearby enemies are blinded, so it's actually really, really good defensively as well. This gives you a ton of damage. If you can get a penetration implicit, that's even better, but you don't absolutely need it. So yeah, this is kind of a cheap alternative. Now, next up, let's go over the helmet. Helmet, most important part is that you have the enchant. Now, the thing is, getting a glimpse of chaos with the right enchant is obviously a little bit hard. It's already late in the league, so not a lot of people are online anyways. I bought this from the TFT Discord. I paid a guy and he farmed me this in like 36 hours. I paid like 8x for the enchant. The base basically costed nothing. And so basically, this helmet is so good because it gives you an additional projectile, which is very, very nice. It gives you ink life, also ink energy shield, since we're hybrid, kind of. Ink mana is useless. And chaos resistance is 0 is also very nice because usually it's -60. So you don't have to, if you do not invest anything in chaos res, you basically get 60 chaos res as well. You do have reduced fire, cold, and lightning res, which is very, very annoying. So if you want to go for something more offensive, get a helmet with nearby enemies have minus resistances, or nearby enemies take additional elemental damage, or just resistances and a lot of life. But yeah, this one was kind of good, but I will say that this is more of a defensive helmet. If you don't care about defenses, definitely go for something more offensive. After that, we have our shield. Now, I went with a more defensive shield here as well. I just wanted to have a nice experience. You can definitely make this build do a lot more damage, by the way. You can probably get like 50% more damage. I also don't have a 2-stat Watcher's Eye, so yeah, we'll go over that next. But this shield has basically recover yes and recover life on block. The Endurance, Frenzy, or Power Charge when you block doesn't really do much. It was just the third suffix that I hit with the Awakener Orb. And I don't know, I just rerolled Caster and I hit life and a little bit of spell damage. I just said, okay, let's leave it here. Put on the 6% of Fire's extra chaos and we're done. Now, if you want to be more offensive, Light of Lunaris is extremely good. We're crit capped with Glancing Blows, so this one will give you a ton of crit multi, especially if you can't afford good jewels. I would probably go for this instead. It will also cost less than a shield like this, of course, but it will make you a little bit squishier, so it just depends on your playstyle. Then the gloves. So what you want on your gloves is the socketed gems are supported by level 20 slower projectiles. This will make your rolling magma a lot more manageable. It will give you a lot more coverage. It will also increase your damage, of course. You definitely want life. This build is very life-starved. We don't have that much space, unfortunately. Maybe get resistances on. I also went for unnerve enemies for 4 seconds on hit. You can Awakener Orb this together with the slower projectile and just see what happens. I managed to hit a pretty good one. But yeah, the unnerve is basically just 10% more damage, which is nice. But if you're on a budget, that's what I would cut from these gloves. Now, as for a chest slot, we went for a lot of spell crit. This is Maven spell crit with chance to gain a frenzy charge on hit. I bought this one for, I think, 30x or something. There's also a lot of flat life here and increased energy shield. You could definitely make this one better with additional curse and then get another ring with flammability, so you can have the mark and the curse. That would do even more damage, but I just went with this. It's a nice defensive option. And what you want to have is the prefix open, so you can craft 10% of max life as extra maximum energy shield. But yeah, then the boots. Now these boots look pretty fancy, but all I did here was basically Awaken Orb together, the increased cooldown recovery and the onslaught. And then I just, in the prefix slot, I rerolled with Harvest crit. You can only get elusive. Obviously with suffixes cannot be changed, so your Awakener Orb stats don't go away. And then you just put a Veil mod on with Iceling, and you craft on Cannot Be Frozen. Done. The only really important mod here is the cooldown recovery. Everything else is just movement speed related. So if you want to save on something, just don't get all those mods, I guess. But yeah, after that, Torrent's Reclamation. This one's a big one. It gives us cooldown recovery to reach the threshold. It gives us increased attack and cast speed, which is very, very nice for the fluidity of the gameplay. And it also gives us the Greater Harbinger of Time, which gives us more action speed, so more movement speed and more attack speed to get even more consistent procs. Now, you don't really need these. You can replace this if you have a Headhunter, obviously go for a Headhunter. You can also replace it with any Stygian Vice or Leather Belt, get a little bit more tanky. maybe make it worth to go for some more offensive options and kind of even it out here. But this is definitely the best in slot. This will get you, like I said, to the next cooldown recovery breakpoint. So it's really, really important. It also makes you a lot faster for mapping. So yeah, this is one of the first items I would get for the build. Now, as for jewelry next, we're using an alls here with Anger Has No Reservation. Now, since all our Spellslingers are going to reserve all our mana, since we have 3 different spells, we can't really run Anger, and this allows us to also run a Anger Watcher's Eye here. So it's just really, really nice. In my opinion, it's best in slot, but if you don't have the money for an Anger Watcher's Eye, we only have Leech and Fire Pen, which cost like 5x or whatever. The best one would be Fire Pen and Crit Multi, which costs like 70-80x, which I didn't want to invest here. But if you have a really good Anger Watcher's Eye, this is a complete no-brainer. Otherwise, maybe you can just go for Life, Crit Multi, whatever you want. I think this is really, really nice because Anger itself is just 25%, I think around 25% more damage. So yeah, our Anoint is Command of Steel. So we are Glancing Blows here, and we have 75% chance to block. So nodes like Arcane Swiftness gives us 75% increased damage because this gives us damage per block chance. And the same is true for down here, the Command of Steel. This makes us, with the 3% chance to block, this gets us to the 75% block cap. And it also then gives us 75% increased damage. So that is our Anoint. Now, as for rings, what you want here is Assassin's Mark on one ring is really, 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 really important because we are also Deadeye and we get increased mark kind of effectiveness. Now, that's why you do not want stuff like flammability in this build. This does not work with flammability because flammability is a curse, not a mark. So you definitely want Assassin's Mark on one of your rings. Other than that, if you're running Glimpse of Chaos, get all the resistance you can. You will need it most certainly. Other than that, a lot of life. And if you have the space, do non-channeling skills have minus to mana cost. This is just to make the barrage a little bit more, a little bit nicer to use, especially in no region maps. It's not super necessary, but yeah. Also, something I forgot to mention is Snake Pit. Now, this one will give you spell damage, some cold res, and most important, the cast speed doesn't do anything. And most importantly, it gives you another chain. Now, if you use this, be sure to have it in your right ring slot, because as it states here, if it's in the left ring slot, it will actually make it so projectiles cannot chain, but they fork instead. I definitely would use the chain instead. It's a lot better. So if you want to go from 1 to 2 chains, go for it. At the end game, I didn't really feel like it's necessary, but especially if you have like cheaper gear, if you don't do as much damage, for packs, it's going to be very, very nice to actually have the 2 chains. You're going to then explode packs way more consistently with 1 shot, and it will make mapping just a lot more convenient. Then as for our jewels, like I said, we're using a Watcher's Eye. I don't really need the Fire Leech. I already get Fire Leech from this node here, but I don't know. I didn't really want to invest 80x into a Crit Multi and Fire Pen one, but if you want to spend the monies, that's definitely the way to go. It will give you another like 13% more damage, so that's really, really nice. We're using a Glorious Vanity Doriani's, so we can get Corrupted Soul. This is basically the bread and butter of all hybrid builds. It is really, really nice, especially with this shield. We're going to recover a lot of energy shield back and life. So yeah, it's just really, really cool. At the end, we have like 2,200 energy shield on top. So yeah, just a really nice fix. And we also get some extra node here. The best node you can get here is the Leech is really, really good if you don't have Leech on your Watcher's Eye. But if you have that, there's also a node that gives you fire damage and Fire Pen here. But that's only for absolute min-max. You can also respec this if it isn't anything that you want. But definitely go for a Glorious Vanity. It has to be Doriani specifically. And yeah, then we also use a Rolling Flames. Now, our Fireball can, with this, inflict Scorch, which reduces enemy elemental resistances up to a certain degree. It's basically like shock in that fashion. And what's cool about it is we are using a Divergent Fireball, basically giving us increased effect of non-damaging ailment on enemies, so our Scorch gets more effectiveness more often. But yeah, that's basically it for the items. And next up, let's go into the gems. So gems are a little interesting. Now, everything basically starts with inspiration. So something you have to understand when doing Spellslinger, especially when you run like 3 different spells, is if you want to actually manage to do that, you have to run supports that have a low reservation. So you don't want to use a lot of these 140 reservation multiplier support gems like Elemental Focus or whatever, or Controlled Destruction. You cannot do that. You won't have the space for it. We are already scaling Reduced Reservation. It would still not be enough, which is nice for fire skills because they get Divergent Combustion. Now, this is obviously maybe not as good as an Elemental Focus setup would be, but with an Elemental Focus, it would be basically impossible to manage the mana. This only has 120, which is really, really nice. And the biggest thing here is Anomalous Inspiration. This gives us a lot more damage, like 37% more damage, and it only has a 115% reservation multiplier, which is huge. And we do only trigger all these spells, but if we have our Barrage also linked to Inspiration, this will give us Inspiration charges, and that counts for all our setups, which is really, really nice. So let's go over Barrage first. Barrage, you want the normal one. It really does not matter. You get Inspiration here, you get Calling Strike, and you get faster attacks. You can also replace the faster attacks with Power Charge on Crit. If you want to have Power Charges against bosses, it definitely helps. You can also have like a white socket in your in wherever you have this in, for example, in your helmet, to gem swap it with Power Charge on Crit if you want to. But yeah, that's basically this. This activates our Inspiration. Now we have our free Spellslinger setups with Divergent Fireball, Rolling Magma, and Blazing Salvo, and our 3 Inspiration supports. So that's already the 3 links. And then we have Divergent Combustions in all of them, which is the 4 links. So these are all basically the same. The only thing you have to remember is that you want the Rolling Magma in your gloves. So right here, just so you get the supported by slower projectiles, because that's really, really nice for Rolling Magma. Now, this one doesn't matter where it goes. Let's just put it into the boots like I did. And this will be our 6th link, the Blazing Salvo. You can experiment around. If you really love Fireball, if you feel like Fireball is better maybe than Blazing Salvo, you can put Fireball in there. I just after testing it a bit, I just felt like Blazing Salvo was the obvious choice. So we have Spellslinger here, just the same, Blazing Salvo, Inspiration, excuse me, Combustion. And as the last 2 support gems, we kind of had a little bit of mana to play with. The combination I came up with is Awakened Fire Penetration, which is always a good damage multiplier. It does have 140% reservation multiplier, but we had just enough to fit it in since we did use increased critical strike support, which is really, really nice. This one isn't even qualityed, I just see. But yeah, this only has a 115% reservation multiplier. For what it gives you, that is really, really nice. So we combo that with the Awakened Fire Penetration, and we're basically exactly reserving all our mana. After that, all the gem space we have left is our two 3 links, which is going to be a cast when damage taken setup with increased duration and anomalous steel skin. If you have some way to get endurance charges, for example, you have the endurance charge mod on your chest, then you can go for Immortal Call. But if you do not have any way to generate endurance charges reliably, just go for steel skin instead. As for our last setup, this is just going to be our 1 aura, which is Anger. This doesn't reserve any mana, so we can just get Empower for free. So if you have the monies for an Empower 4, they're pretty cheap at this point in the league. You just get some extra levels, some extra damage. And at the end, what I have is Divergent Smoke Mine for some extra clear speed. Now, as always, I'm just going to mention it here again. What I do is I put Detonate Mines on my left click. So when I move and I press Smoke Mine, it just immediately detonates. I do not have to click 2 buttons. So for me, this is basically a better Flame Dash. All right, next up, the passive tree. Now, you might actually think that we're a little bit in a weird position here as a Deadeye in the Ranger region, but it's actually not as bad. The starting node here is Proj damage. This is Proj damage. We're Proj based. And especially since here are reservation nodes, Deadeye is actually pretty nice, honestly. We get a jewel slot here. We go up here. All the decks here is also necessary and very, very nice. So we have good pathing nodes. Now up here, basically what you want to reach is Arcane Swiftness and do it however you want. I chose to go this way and then up here. You do not really want to get projectile speed because it will make rolling Magma worse in the way that it overlaps. The faster it is, the less it will overlap on a single enemy. And it's not really needed. These are also not really that great nodes. So yeah, you just want to get up here, take the crit and take Arcane Swiftness as soon as possible. Here is a very nice spot for Corrupted Soul. As I said, if you have something nice here for 1 pointer, this is a notable for 1 point, which is always nice. So if you get something nice here, take it, otherwise ignore it. Now, other than that, I'm only level 94. These will be my next 2 points. Definitely grab the life here. Then I went up here. I didn't feel like these are actually worth it. I just wanted to path through here, and we got 20% AoE, which is nice. Up here, I went for the Heart of Flame. Since we cannot support all of our gems with Awakened Fire Pen, we only have space for it in the single target setup. I wanted to get a little bit pen from the tree as well. It's also nice for the 0.2% of fire damage leached as energy shield, because while we do have life leech, we do not have any energy shield leech. Now, as for the cluster jewel, I only have 1 large cluster jewel here because it didn't really, I couldn't really fit more into the build, and we also don't really need any mediums. So there's 2 medium cluster jewels that are really, really nice. Number 1 is just a personal favorite of mine, and that is this flask cluster with spiked concoction. So this one gives you Alchemist Genius, and Alchemist Genius is 20% increased flask effect and 20% increased flash charges gained, which is just huge for any build in my opinion. Also some attack speed is nice. And I just paired it with 8% max life because why not? Now as another, so this one is also optional, but I think it's very nice. The fire damage over time multiplier obviously does nothing, so this pathing node is dead. But what we get is Cooked Alive. Since we have everything, and we don't have any LE focus setups or something that would prevent us from igniting, and we actually have combustion in all of the setups because of the more fire damage. But this also gives us ignite chance, which is really, really nice, since enemies will always be ignited and they get -10 fire res. Basically, once again, making up a little bit for the Awakened Fire Pen that we cannot use in this and this setup. And very important, Cremator is super nice against porcupines. If you die to porcupines, it's because you don't have this. This will destroy enemies, basically rendering their corpses useless, which is also very nice against beyond mobs. So just for utility, I would go with this. It's really, really cute. Now you can go further down here. The second big thing we want to go to is Sovereignty. This in total is 14% reduced reservation, which is absolutely huge for this build. And after that, we also want to get to Glancing Blows. So our passive tree kind of makes itself, as you can see. We're just running around, grabbing our super important nodes, and on our way, we take everything that's nice. So we also took the AoE nodes here. If I level it further, I would also take this AoE node here. I would take Retribution and these life nodes. But what is important, excuse me, is down here we have Glancing Blows. So since you probably already know Glancing Blows, but just to clarify, this just gives you better blocks, more consistent blocks at the cost of blocks not actually reducing all your damage, but only only reducing it by 35%, bringing it to 65 damage from blocked hits. This is really, really nice because you're going to block more often and get the recover energy shield and recover life on block more often. And you also get more damage from Arcane Swiftness and from Command of Steel, since you're now block capped at 75%. At the end, I also took these nodes. They might look bad, but they give you a little bit more block, and especially spell block is really, really nice. But they also give you LE res, and since I'm using Glimpse of Chaos, every bit of LE res is very, very welcome. Now, I did mention something about possible league starting this. If I do, I will make an own video on it, but just really, really quickly, I had a blast while leveling with Spellslinger, and until level 24, all I did was basically go through the projectile nodes here and only use Fireball normally. It was actually completely fine, And once I reached level 24 for Spellslinger, I just went for a Fireball Blazing Salvo setup, a Rolling Magma left for later. But since you're already here, very quickly you can get the reservation from here. And all you do then is go up here, grab every damage node you can get, and slowly but surely go to Sovereignty to get in your third setup, your Rolling Magma setup. But I really had a blast with leveling. It was kind of easy, which is also why I thought maybe it could be a good league starter. Now, I thought about this a bit, and I think Eclipse Solaris is very, very reasonable to get day one. So that and Light of Lunaris, which should also be possible, and just using a simple Tabula and just being a little bit more squishy, I think this can definitely work out. Now, Snake Pit is not really necessary, but we can probably get that on like day 2 after a lot of people killed Hydra, if they revert the boss drop nerfs, which I think they will do. Otherwise, it's going to be very easy to get Snake Pit in general. We can also get cooldown recovery on our rare belt. It's a veiled mod after all, so that's nice. But yeah, I don't really see anything here that we would need. The only big one maybe that we're going to lose for the first day is Dying Sun, but I'm pretty positive that since all the other stuff is going to be very cheap, we can invest into Dying Sun day 2, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. Yeah, so I think this could actually be viable. If I make a video about it, I'm obviously going to make a path of building. I'm going to test this with cheaper items, and I'll keep you up to date. That's it for the build guide. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, subscribe. And yeah, Spellslinger is alive. There's still setups out there that maybe people haven't played yet. I just went through some lists of fire spells, and I found this, and it was a blast to play and a blast to min-max. And yeah, I would love to see some other people come up with different Spellslinger stuff. It's just a really, really nice play style, really, really fun. I mean, look at this, come on. So yeah, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.